we're going. Okay. Tonight, Sister Janet convinced me to go to Leviticus. Oh, I went ahead and went. It's good because, excuse me, it's picks up from where we were in Exodus. If the last part of Exodus, if we remember, they were putting the tabernacle together. Okay, they're saying do this over here, do that over here, put the and then at the final thing they put everything together, and then it goes into Leviticus, and I'm not so sure. Well, I'm pretty sure they didn't really have. They call it the 5 books, the Pentateuch or the Torah. I'm not sure how they had that. I know they had it on scrolls. I don't know how it was broken up, is what I'm trying to say. Because they didn't have chapters and verses like we have today. And I'm not sure they had names, titles, exactly. I'll have to look that up. But they call it the Torah, which is this book. And they always refer back in Genesis or back in Exodus. Even Jesus referred back in Psalms. So I kind of think they had an outline of it, but I don't know for sure. That's just something that what I'm trying to get across, not to confuse y'all. This is a continuation.
Yeah.
It's going straight from Exodus into Leviticus, and it'll go to Numbers and Deuteronomy. While Moses was up on the mountain is maybe the best time, or all during the 40-year traveling. Moses was getting this from God. We don't know exactly when. We know when he went up on the mountain, he got the 10 Commandments. God spoke the 10 Commandments to the people, if we remember that, back on the mountain. And then later on, when he called Moses up and, of course, told everybody to stay away from the mountain, he went ahead and got through the rest of it. There's quite a few more laws and everything in that. So I want to read you a little preface to it from Matthew Henry. It says, there's nothing historical, talking about Leviticus, in all of this book of Leviticus except the account which gives us the consecration of the priesthood, which is chapters 8 and 9. The punishment of Nadab and Abihu by the hand of God for offering strange fire, which is chapter 10, and Shelosmith's son by the hand of the magistrate for blasphemy in chapter 24. The whole rest of the book is taken up with laws, chiefly the ecclesiastical laws, which God gave to Israel by Moses concerning their sacrifices and offerings, their meats and drinks and divers washings, and the other peculiarities by which God set that people apart for himself and distinguished them from other nations, all which were shadows of the good things to come, which are realized and superseded by the gospel of Christ. We call the book Leviticus from the Septuagint, which is the Latin version of the Bible, because it contains the laws and the ordinances of the Levitical priesthood. And in Hebrews 7 and 11, it refers that way. And the ministrations of it. The Levites were principally charged with these institutions, both to do their part and to teach the people theirs. We read in the close of the foregoing book, which was Exodus, of the setting up of the tabernacle, which was the place of worship. And as that was framed according to the pattern, so must the ordinances of worship be, which were there to be administrated. In these the divine appointment was as particular as in the former, and must be as punctually observed. The remaining record of these abrogated laws is of use to us for the strengthening of our faith in Jesus Christ as the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, and for the increase of our thankfulness to God, that by him we are freed from the yoke of the ceremonial law and live in the times of Reformation. Excuse me. Now that's Matthew Henry, speaking a long time ago. So we remember these things, and it's a kind of a short lesson tonight, but I'm going to try to, if I didn't really go over it till this week because I had other stuff going on. But I'm going to try to put a couple of them together if it's this short, because mainly it is the laws. And we have reviewed some of the laws, and some of them we haven't.
And some of it it's mentioned that in Exodus, God gave the law.
Right.
He spoke the law.
Right.
Then on after that, it was Moses.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they were going, he was, in other words, renewing and rehashing
Right.
the law to them. And, well, that's, a lot of this is, even though sometimes, even in those 5 books, sometimes it seems like, well, that's the same thing. But if you notice, each time it's the same thing, but it happened. I mean, it's being recorded just a little different.
Tells it a little different.
Maybe by,
That's right. It goes into more detail. It says you need to do this. Well, this is how to do that.
Yep.
And why did they need that? When was the first sacrifice done?
Abel.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Let me go back to where I'm at. And let's go back to Genesis. 3, I think, isn't it? 3 or 4. 4. Yeah, because that was the fall. It was 3.
The first one was Abel, and the next recorded one, I think, is Noah.
Mm-hmm. Noah's the one that's...
And then the next recorded one is Abraham.
Mm-hmm. And in process of time, this is in Genesis 4 and 3, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. Now we talk about that when we was talking about Genesis, why did it accept it? We don't know a lot of what happened at that time because we see, as we go through Leviticus and as we went through part of Exodus, and we'll see as we continue to go on, there's more than one offering. Tonight, predominantly, we're going to talk about the burnt offering. But there's the drink offering, the grain offering, the vapor, what do they call it, smoke offering. It's not, I forget. There's another one. But there's a whole bunch of different offerings that are given in special occasions around it. Why God did this was they weren't the only ones making offerings or sacrifices, were they? The foreign, what we would call the foreign people, all the other people that weren't Jewish at that time were from Abraham, even those from Abraham. They were making sacrifices also.
Especially in the time of Noah.
Mm-hmm. Time of Noah. It was just not to God, their God, not the only God, not to Yahweh. It was to other gods that they dreamed up. The fertility god, the moon god, the sun god, the whatever god that they, tree god, all these different ones. They began to worship, man began to worship. That was one of the things that drove God to wipe them out with Noah, with the flood, because it said the sin had waxed so great. In God's mind, what is not in God's mind, what did he give the first commandment?
Love the Lord thy God with all.
That's right. You should love, he's a jealous God. You should love me. You're not going to love anybody else. Me, Yahweh. So that is one of the predominant things that we look at. We look at murder and all these other things that, seem so bad, and it is. But to God, he sees things different. If a person's not serving him, he's an apostate. He's somebody that, God can deal with them, because he does all throughout the Bible with those that aren't serving him, but they don't recognize it in most cases. They don't see it. They have to usually, and that's the way he worked through the prophets to help them see it. Up to the time of Abraham was righteous but it wasn't because of anything that he did. He was serving God. In the Sunday school lesson, they've been talking about going down through, the history. They started in Genesis, and now right now they got to Abraham, and how Abraham's father had moved them out of Ur, I think it was, because it had gotten so corrupt. And he wanted to move them out to get away from that, to try to help serve. And he brought his family and took them away. So, to me, he may not have been serving God the way God wanted him to, but he was still making an effort. And Abraham finished that as far as he went above and beyond that. So because of that, God found favor with Abraham. Or Abraham found favor with God. So, anyway, long story short, that's what God was trying to do. He was trying to set a standard for the sacrifices, because many people have sacrificed. Some of them even sacrificed their children, sacrificed live people besides their children, whatever, and he wanted to do it. Now, the other people, other than the Jewish people, or other than what is going to be said here, they would sacrifice to a big temple or a big golden statue or whatever. Here, God has set it up. We're not doing that. First of all, the first few, like you said, Abraham, Adam, and Noah, and Abraham, they gathered stones. And it even went so far as that if a hammer falls on that stone, you're not to use that. He doesn't want trim stone. He wants natural stones built of the altar. Because one of the things is the other people would make marvelous shrines of this by hammering and using their abilities to serve this God. God didn't want that. He said, I built this world. You've got these rocks. Use those rocks. And they did. Now he gave them the tabernacle to use. He's got it all set up, and now he's going to tell them this is how you're going to do these sacrifices. Okay? To kind of set the stage for where we're going to start out with. Verse 1, now the Lord called unto Moses and spoke to him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, now this is kind of interesting. I didn't really realize this, but all you have to do is read the Bible, and it usually says stuff and you don't realize it. Now the Lord called unto Moses, and he spoke out of the tabernacle of congregation. Last time, when the Exodus, when the tabernacle was finished, what happened? God moved in. The Shekinah glory sunk into that tabernacle, into the holiest of holies. Now, that's where it picks right up from there. God is speaking, and the people, I guess they're hearing it, or Moses heard it for sure. He's talking. Up until that time, Moses had a tent set aside. Remember, back over here, Moses' tent that he would go serve. Now the tabernacle's set up, and he's not even in it. He's outside of the, at this door looking in type, listening to what God's telling him. So, to me, he's just calling unto Moses, telling him, hey, this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to work.
God spoke to Adam,
Mm-hmm.
and even Eve, I guess, too. But he spoke to Cain
Mm-hmm.
in an audible voice.
Right.
Spoke to Abraham especially up to this time right here. God spoke directly to those that he was using
Right.
at the time. And I thought, wow. The Spirit has spoken to me before so strong that I knew what he was saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I've never heard an audible voice. Now some say they have, and he may do that because he does whatever he wants, however he wants.
Right.
But man, if God started talking to me in an audible voice, I might get a little shaky.
Well, I've been in the house before, and I know there's nobody else there, and I can hear my name, and I'm like, okay, because I thought Darla come back in or something, was gone and come back in, and I'll say, "What'd you want?" And I don't hear nothing. And am I hearing things? I'm not saying it's God or anything. I just don't know what it is. But I've heard, audible voices calling me, doing
When you walked
this.
to the house, when you heard that walk to the house.
Oh, I was sitting down. No, I just had to go back and look and see if the door was still locked to see if she'd come in, because I didn't know. Because I was hollering at her and she wasn't in. So it's just one of those things that, and I'm sure it's something like that, whether it was in my head and I just heard it, I don't know. I can't really tell you. But I know others that I've heard say the very same thing as far as, they have heard an audible voice. I can't say that I've heard, they didn't say I'm God, blah, blah, blah. It just said, Daryl, type deal. And I don't know if it's getting my attention or doing something, not there yet, I guess.
So in this verse number 1, you're saying Moses was not inside at this point?
I don't think so. Let me go back. Says he was, the Lord was in
The Lord was
the
in
Holy
there.
of Holies, and he was on the mercy seat. That's where, above where the angels were, and that's where it tells us many times. It doesn't tell us here, but it tells us many times. Go back into Exodus, and it'll tell us. I think he's right there at the door. I don't think he's in it. We can't really see that. It doesn't tell us exactly where he's at, but it spoke to him out of the tabernacle, is what I'm saying. So
Moses couldn't get, he wasn't the high priest, was he?
no, he wasn't. Aaron was the high
I know
priest. Yeah.
he's got to.
I mean, he still stood face to face. Well, not face to face, but he still stood in the presence of God on the mountain and all these things. And I'm not saying he couldn't, but I'm just saying the word. And here again, you have to go back to the original language, but it appears, if it's translated correctly, God spoke to him out of the tabernacle. And the tabernacle is the tent, per se. So I'm saying he's right there in front of it. And I think that's what.
But God's
in the tabernacle, and he's talking outside. It's like if we open the doors, people would be standing, and Moses would be right outside the door. Now that's what I get out of that. And I've seen a couple of other commentators say that. This guy doesn't really say that, but. Okay, let's go to number 2. Brother Epperson, y'all read 2 for us? It's on that first page, halfway down.
Well, get my spectacles here. It says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, if any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, he shall bring your offering of the cattle, even the herd, and of the flock."
Okay. Now the people aren't hearing this, evidently, because he said, "You tell the people." He's speaking to Moses, and then you go tell the people. That's what, in the first part, when he first went up to the mountain, the first 40 days, God spoke the 10 commandments to the people. Remember? Because they were there. They were gathered up. He told them, "You guys, this is what I'm going to require of you. Do you all agree?" They heard that, and they all said, "Yes, we will." And then it wasn't for the whole 40 days, because they got back, and then Moses continued up there, and then they started having their parties. They forgot all about it. And they have a second 40 days up on top of the mountain. So, but he's telling them, if any of the children of Israel, speak to them, and if any man bring an offering to the Lord. This is not required.
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary. This is a voluntary. There are some that are voluntary, and there's some that are not voluntary.
Okay, so the burnt offering is a voluntary one.
It is. It is. Now
Basically, it's a substitute for Christ.
It is. It is. Let me see if I can find.
So what would down in this lesson. I may be getting ahead.
No, it's
What
okay.
would make some want to do it and some not do it?
Well, it's an offering unto God, and God places it upon their hearts, I think. Now it goes through and starts telling us here in just a little bit, this is supposed to be out of the first, the finest that you have.
Like a first fruit.
The first fruit. It doesn't specifically say this here, but it talks about the herd. When you bring me a calf, or you bring me a goat or a sheep, or even the doves, you bring the best you have. You don't give me one. There's this funny story that was talking about this, that farmer said back in the Jewish days or whatever, yeah, had a twins and they were both perfect and they were good, and it went on for a little while, and he said, I'm going to take one of those up there and give it to God. You know, it's one of the finest. And then went a little while longer, and he forgot, and one of the calves died. He went up to his wife and he said, you know, that goat of the gods died. I don't know what. You know, he had already assumed that was God's, but that's not the way it works. Okay.
He thought God just took it.
He just thought God took it, but that's not the way it works.
You know, when I was studying this, I thought, you talk about an orchestration to do all of this, okay? And they had to have the animals. You know, again, they brought animals out of, you know, man, this was quite a undertaking to move all these people, all this tabernacle, all these, the sheep, the goats, the cattle.
Just like, and then you go back to Noah and all those. You know, Noah, first thing he did when he got off the boat, he offered a sacrifice, one of each of the clean, the seven. He offered all of that. So I was trying to find here in this commentary, I don't have it. All the different sacrifices. Let me look. I think I closed that one. Anyway, and we'll get more into it as we get through here, both the voluntary and the required. But this is the voluntary one. It's supposed to happen now. They do it several times. They do it.
They had the burnt offering, the meal offering, the peace offering, the non-sweet savor offering, or the sin offering, and the trespass offering, and then the law of offerings.
Yep.
Well, you know, I don't have scripture to back it, but I feel like there was lots of them that came out of Egypt that were not serving God.
No.
They were too quick to jump back to having a calf made.
Exactly.
So they still had implanted in their heads and minds the worshiping that they done while they were with the Egyptians.
Sure.
And God had to wean them away from that or whatever and tell them, this is the way you're going to do it. You're not going to follow after the way of the Egyptians and the things that you grew up around there while you were 400 years in that. This is how you are going to serve me. So he had to come across pretty firm on it and pretty detailed to it.
The 10 Commandments is very stern. This is what you got to do. You've got to do this. These burnt offerings and all these are things that are, as we said, voluntary, and it's as you feel like you need to take another offering. If it be, so be it once a week, so be it once a year, whatever your offering is, that's when you need to do it. Now, the priests offered every morning and every evening a burnt offering. That was for the whole people. Okay? They did that every day because they knew somebody had sinned. I mean, both in the morning and in the evening. That wasn't really a voluntary offering. The priests did that themselves, mainly to keep themselves holy. Just trying to say something more?
Well, it's type and shadow of Christ. In Christ, he came voluntary and died.
Right.
And we come to him voluntary.
Yeah.
And being a type and shadow of Christ, then it has to, it's voluntary.
Or that's where the choice comes in for us.
right.
Well, even in today's times, when you're talking about it's optional on that, if God moves upon you and tells you to give an extra $100 or whatever in the offering, you need to do that.
That's yours. Now, not everybody in the
Not
everybody in the
building
audience
has to
needs to
do
do
it.
it. That's right.
Well,
But
if
that's
they can
yours.
speak to that person they want, but if they did, they need to do it.
Sure,
So if
sure.
you told them to bring forth a cattle, then it was not only was an offering, it was a matter of were they being obedient to God.
Right. And that's what it is. That's the problem. That's the crux of it.
Exactly.
It says in the section B on page 2, brings an offering to the Lord. Because sacrifice was already known to Israel, these instructions to the priests were not particularly new. They were mostly a clarification of the foundation that was already known to Israel through the tradition of their fathers. God planned wisely in bringing the law of the sacrifices at this time. Before the tabernacle meeting was built, there was no one place of sacrifice, and the procedures for sacrifice couldn't really be settled and regulated. But now, with the completion of the tabernacle, Israel could bring their sacrifice to one place and follow the same procedure for each sacrifice. It says first 7 chapters of Leviticus deal with personal, voluntary offerings. 1 through 5 are mostly instructions to the people who bring the offering. 6 and 7 are mostly instructions to the priests concerning the offerings. So that kind of tells you what it is. And then it tells, when it says bring an offering of the livestock of the herd, that didn't mean go out and shoot a deer or shoot something and bring it to God. They wanted it to have some sacrifice to you. It had to be something that meant something to you. It wasn't free. It wasn't, it's to mean something to you. So
It had to be
a domesticated animal.
Yeah.
That's right. One that is innocent, just like sheep, goats, cows. So that is giving of the to God of the herd and the flock meant that sacrifice costs something, and that's why He made it. Okay. Verse 3, Iris, you want to read that? That's on page 3.
If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own voluntary will at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord.
Okay. So here's what we said before. It's voluntary, but he is to go and offer it at the door of the tabernacle. He can't go in to the tabernacle per se, but he's offering it at the tabernacle of the congregation. So he's coming up there and he's offering it to the priests. Now they have to accept it, and they will. They'll go through it, and we'll go through it here in just a minute. But it's a this particular one is a burnt sacrifice, as we've said before, meaning that every part of the animal is burned except the hide. The birds, everything's burnt. They flock it or take the feathers off. But other than that, that hide is used by the priests. That's kind of part of their payment, if you want to think of it that way. But all the rest of it is used in the sacrifice. It's burnt completely up. The head, the fat, the legs, everything. We'll go through that in just a minute. It's supposed to be a male because most male animals are thought to be stronger and considered more valuable. It must be without blemish. That means it has to be as the best that you have. I don't say perfect because they may not all have, but it should be the best. Why? Because it's a sacrifice. You're making that sacrifice of giving that to God. It says this demonstrates the principle that to atone for the sin of another, the sacrifice must be perfect. An imperfect sacrifice would neither atone for its own sin nor the sin of others. And this ultimately points toward the perfect ultimate sacrifice of Jesus. Jesus fulfilled this standard, being a sinless, pure sacrifice without blemish. And it gives 3 or 4 scripture references there. Here again in the Septuagint, it says it's translated the adjective tamen, without blemish, with the word amos. Peter employed this Greek adjective to refer to the death of Christ as the offering of a lamb unblemished in 1 Peter 1:19. So this just goes through and it tells us that he wants the best, and that there's a little story that talks about the God's calf died. I couldn't remember if it's in here or not. I read about 4 or 5 different commentaries, so I can't remember what I read where. He shall offer it of his own free will. God didn't want the offering of the burnt sacrifice to be forced. Each animal had to be freely offered. And this illustrates a principle that God wants our hearts freely given to him. Bertha, verse 4, it's right there at the bottom of page 4. Very bottom of page 4.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm still gonna find it.
It's right here.
Oh, it's very, oh, I did not see that. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to take atonement for him.
Why do you think he puts a hand on his head?
Make sure it's pure.
He's transferring his sin to that offering. What do you think when we pray today and we lay hands on believers? We're not transferring our sin to them. We're transferring what God has given us, representing the same. It's a type of that, representing God, touching that person, whatever it might be. But it has to be the one giving the sin offering. He's the one doing it. And the touch, it's not a tap. It's not like we do today with the ladies just barely touching them. It's a pushing down on that head. You're bringing all, with both hands almost. You're bringing about, I want all of my sin to go into this calf. So this sacrifice will wipe away my sin.
Atonement means covering.
That's right. Down there at the bottom says the idea behind the Hebrew word for atonement is kofar, is to cover. It's to be our covering. The idea was that individual sin and guilt were covered by the blood of the sacrificed animal. And then down at the bottom, very, very bottom, atonement at 1 mint was accomplished by Jesus' sacrifice. It was done once for us. So we don't have to do this again. 5 through 9, do you want to read that, Janet?
Which ones?
5 through 9.
Okay. And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood, and sprinkle the blood round about upon the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall he shall flay the burnt offering, and cut it into his pieces. And the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire upon the altar, and lay the wood in order upon the fire. And the priests, Aaron's sons, shall lay the parts, the head, and the fat, in order upon the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But his inwards and his legs shall he wash in water. And the priest shall burn all on the altar, to be a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto the Lord.
Okay.
Okay, now I have some questions on
Sure.
that.
Sure.
You may be going to go in and
Yeah,
explain.
well, we'll talk about it a little bit. This is a combination. You don't just bring put your hands on it and then the priest takes it away. First words, and he shall kill the bullock. he's the one that has to kill that bullock. He has to cut his throat. The priest will then help him as they drain the blood, because there can't be any blood in the body. They have to drain the blood out, and they have to wait a little bit for that to happen. Okay, so that's drained. And then he starts flaying, starts taking the hide off. You know, the priests are going to help him with that. He cuts it up and does all these things. So it's a combination of the priests and the person bringing forth the offering that's done. So he cuts it up, and he cuts it up into pieces. He flays it, and like I said, they help him with that, probably telling him this is the easiest to cut it. Back then, typically, they didn't eat a ton of meat. They ate more bread, fruits, nuts, things like that. They did eat meat, but what I'm saying is they didn't have it every meal like we do, or even once a week like we do. So they may not, and if you're a poor family, we haven't got to this yet, but if you're a poor family, you may never ever have beef, because you're not rich enough. You may have sheep, you may have doves, or you're growing vegetables. You may not ever have that. So you have to take some of yours and go buy whatever you can. And here in a little bit, it'll tell us they can get the doves, turtle doves, or pigeons, or whatever to make their sacrifices. It all depends on what you're going to do. Not every family was a farmer as far as having cattle, or having sheep, or having goats. Now, a lot of them were, but I'm just saying that not everyone was. They had to trade. They would barter back and forth. You know, if they didn't have that, they may have one to get milk. That's what mom and dad, or mom said. We weren't ever rich, but we wasn't ever hungry either. We had cows. They'd give us meat, and they'd give us milk, and the pigs would give us milk, and chickens would give us eggs, or chickens. You know, said we always had food, but they had to grow it, they had to take care of it and raise it. And by any means weren't they, quote, rich at all. But
this cost, I mean, people just sacrifice to do this.
That's right. It's part of their living. I mean, it's part of their herd. If you go back and look at the amount of, quote, rich people, we've kind of in the chosen, we've seen several. You know, the Romans, of course, a lot of those were rich. But Matthew was probably the only one that we would consider rich, and that because he's a tax collector. All the others were trying to make do with what they had. And I think it's very close. You know, a lot of times they had fish, because that's by the lake. It's easier for it to catch. Or they had fruits and vegetables and nuts, dates, and all the different things that they have. That's more typical of what they would eat. Their diet is a little different than what ours is. So, not all of them, but the rich people probably made up 1 to 5% of the total population. So there would not be very many, quote, rich people at all. Most people were either servants to the rich people, if they were, or they worked the farms. They're just peasants.
Okay,
Any
in
more
verse
questions?
8, in verse 8 it says, they shall lay the parts, the head and the fat, in order upon the wood. Was there a certain order that had to be laid out in?
The order that I've seen, it's not so much where they did what, when. You've got to remember that the altar, and I'd have to go back and look at my figures, but I think it was very big. I mean, it was like 10 feet, wasn't it? I think, square. So it could be more than one animal on there at a time. But the main thing that they're trying to get across, that fat will burn hot. So they'll put the fat down first to help consume the rest of the animal. Okay? And the parts with the bigger parts of the bones, the head, the skull, the things like that, they're going to put right in the middle of that hot part, because that way it'll burn it up. They want everything to burn, to be a burnt offering. So it's not so much that, okay, hindquarters go here and, shoulders go here and stomach goes here. They lay the fat down, put it down. So, and I'm not sure how it's done, but if it's on top of it or underneath it or whatever, just like when that bacon gets caught, my son and his college career, they had a barbecue. It was in an apartment and it shouldn't have been out on the deck, but it was, under in a second story with the roof right over here. And they got the great idea of barbecuing some bacon. Well, I think the barbecue went off over the side because it caught fire, and they didn't want to catch the whole apartment on fire. So you can't do that with something that's real greasy like bacon. It ain't going over. They figured that out pretty quick. But yeah. See, I think that's it. And there is a specific way, whatever it was. I think they probably are familiar with that too, because they made sacrifices on there. But somewhere God told them, or someone told them, this is the correct way of doing it. Now, we don't have everything that was told, but it was told to do it in a certain way.
Do we feel that there was multiple sacrifices because of the size of the altar?
Yeah.
Otherwise, with 2 million
It'd take
people,
forever.
There'd be some people,
Yeah.
well, we couldn't get to you.
That's right. I think they had some, and they'd start over here maybe, and then get the next one and put him in the middle, and then put him over here. And I'm not sure how much meat laid out that would be. But
10 foot by 10 foot is the size of the room.
oh yeah, it's huge. I think that's what it was, 7.5 foot to 8 foot maybe. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and read my lesson again. But it's 4.5 foot tall. I remember that. It's almost up to, that. So they had to build a little ramp up on each side to so they could get to it and put stuff in. And then on the front of it is it was up on stones because the ashes would fall through. It had a brazen grate, if we remember, that would let the wood and ashes and everything fall through, and they would rake the coals out, put some more wood on it. So it was very large, and I think that they could get started over here with somebody, and he could be gutting it, cleaning it out and everything, because it wasn't just automatically put. It takes a while to clean this thing.
Well, and since there was the Levitical tribe,
right?
It was priests. I mean, it wasn't.
They had a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't just one family.
No, they had a whole bunch of them that was doing this. Now, if you continue on, in verse 9 it says, but his innards, which is his intestines basically, stomach and intestines, and his legs. His intestines I can understand. His legs, only thing I can think of is maybe they have to be washed anyway. All this will be washed. Well, from the innards. When they cut it open, all the excrement that was in it, the manure and stuff, and that's why they're cleaning it out. They have to wash it out with water. So they're cleaning all that out. And who's doing that? Priests aren't doing that. It's the guy that brought that sacrifice. And so there's going to be, if there's very meat done, there's going to be quite a pile over here of stuff.
Holiness, okay, cleanliness. In other words, he was trying to teach them what it really meant to be holy.
That's right.
I mean, again, from that they learned, and I going back to a little bit, but any animal of prey, a bird of prey, or any could never be used as a sac at all. It had to be something like you said, a goat or a sheep or a dove or something that was, docile.
It couldn't be a crow.
Right.
No, couldn't be a vulture.
Right.
Couldn't be anything that devoured, how you say it, carnivore.
Carnivore. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a whole lot on that if you want.
One of the things that gets me though It says the sweet aroma to the
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah.
Have
And
you
it's-
ever been around burning flesh?
It's nasty smelling. It is. But the burnt offering, it smells good while it's cooking. But if you're burning it, it don't smell too good. You tell that real quick. But to God it is, because they're doing what He has told them to do. Now He's using that as a reference as to what we smell something, and it smells so good to us. Baking bread, fresh cookies, or anything. Oh man, when you enter a house and you smell that, it's so good. That's the way God. It's not saying that smells good to Him, because they are doing what God says. That's pleasing God. They talk about it to Him. It may be a sweet sound. They're doing it for Him, so that's what it is. And you can read through all this if you want to. That goes on down. It talks about sweet aroma.
Yeah, you've got some other good information.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. We're not going to be able to. I mean, we can, but it's already 10 till 8, so we better get on. 10 through 13.
I love going through this stuff, though.
Well,
I think it's something that people don't study very much.
Well, it shows them that there is a message why God did this. It's leading up all the way, leading the people by the hand to eventually what Christ would do. They had to go through a lot to be able to approach God. Under grace, seems easy, and it is easy, but it's still hard to obey that law.
Well, in these first 5 books, the whole foundation for the rest of the Bible, for not only that, for the history of mankind. It started with the fall, and then it went through that there was coming a sacrifice, and then the rest of them began to, fulfill prophecy and prophesy about the coming of Christ. And then I love Hebrews, because Hebrews begins to show some of these offerings here,
how it compares.
Christ is and how spiritual they are.
Verse 10, Harold, you want to read 10, 11, 12, 13?
Yeah. And if his offering be of the flocks, namely of the sheep or of the goats, for a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring it a male without blemish. And he shall kill it on the side of the altar, northward before the Lord and the priest. Aaron's sons shall sprinkle his blood round about upon the altar. And he shall cut it into his pieces with his head and his fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire, which is upon the altar. But he shall wash the inwards and the legs with water, and the priest shall bring it all and burn it upon the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto the Lord.
Okay. Very much like the bull, except a couple of things. First of all, says he doesn't tell us this on the bull. The bull is you're approaching the tabernacle. This one has to be killed on the north side. I don't know why, but it just says on the north side. Now, I don't have our picture here, but if we remember, the tabernacle faced the east, okay? So that altar is right out in front of the tabernacle, and the north would have been not in front of the tabernacle per se. It's on that north side. Now, it's wider, so yes, it's still in front of it, but it's on that north side. One thing that we did miss on the others that we didn't say, once he got the blood, they sprinkled the blood on the altar. That's to kind of make atonement to begin the very first part of it, that they can approach the altar even. And that's done the same thing here too. But that's the main thing. It has to be killed on that north side. They go ahead and do everything the same. They don't say that they flay it, but it's still, they take the hide off just like they do the calf.
Said the burnt offering, the bull had to be skinned, but the sheep and goat were not.
Is that what it says? Yeah, it says it wasn't skinned, was it? I thought they skinned them.
Well, I said a bull was presented as a burnt offering, had to be skinned,
Mm-hmm.
Leviticus 1, but not a sheep or a goat.
And that's interesting. As far as what I was thinking of is the wool. You know, I said, okay, I want to give God this sheep, but I'm taking this wool. I mean, I don't know what they did. Did they give it like that, or do they have to give it just without the wool? I mean, with the wool, everything. I think that would be a sacrifice. So I think that's what's required, and it would burn up. The hide of a cow is not going to burn too good. I mean, it will burn. So maybe that's the justice of it. I thought they did, but I didn't read that, I guess. But not a sheep or goat, okay? And they don't really say, the other thing was the placing the hands on the head of the sheep, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was omitted. It's possible that the author decided not to repeat everything that was done.
Well, don't you think it's also, it could be because he wants them to remember and him not have to constantly repeat?
Yeah, but still,
Because they have to be able to.
he's laying down the law. He's laying down the rules for them, and it's smaller. The head of the calf, you know, you can get your whole heads around them easy. A goat, it all depends on what size they are. They may be a small goat. So I'm not sure, but later on we do know that they have the scapegoat that's talked about, and the hands are placed on the scapegoat. So I would think that they are still done there. And there again, it's talking about the sweet aroma that's been given in. Verse 14, start there. And if the burnt sacrifice for his offering of the Lord be of fowls, then he shall bring his offering of turtle doves or of young pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar and wring off his head and burn it on the altar, and the blood thereof shall be wrung out at the eye of the altar. And I think I meant side. I may have left the S on. And he shall pluck away his crop with his feathers and cast it beside the altar on the east side by the place of the ashes. So that's where the front of the deal, where they pull the ashes out. And he shall cleave it with wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, sweet savor unto the Lord. And as we step down, this is, as I said, the rich people, you give as you can be given. Some people give offerings of thousands, millions of dollars. We can't afford that. Some people can afford to give $1. The widow, she gave her 2 mites, 2 pennies, if you want to say that. Whatever you give, he's not saying that you have to give a cow. If you don't have a cow and can't afford to get a cow, get a sheep. If you can't afford to get a sheep, get a dove, turtle dove, or a pigeon. So that's what he's trying to tell, that
Could
it's not.
families go together?
They do, and later on we'll see that in some of the. It's kind of like when the families got together for the lamb, for the sacrifice for the blood that they put on the lintel on the Passover per se. If it was a small family, they wouldn't have it. But this is a little bit different. If you go through the priest is the one that killed the bird here. He wrung the neck. And then it goes on and it says he, which again, I think is the priest. I don't think it's the person. It could be the person plucking it, getting all the feathers off of it. I don't know, but it seems like in this particular case, more people are doing this and they can do this a lot faster. So maybe not a lot of people did cows or even sheep. Maybe a lot of them brought the birds, and they can do a lot of birds at once. So I don't know exactly. Here again, we're not told, but
I love that there was a God accepts the poor man's bird as much as the rich man's bull.
that's right. That's right. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, that 1 in 10 people or 1 in 100 people could maybe afford a cow, but all the rest of them, maybe all they can afford is the birds. And that's all of that. One of the things that, if you like some of this, on TBN, tonight is starting, I think it's at 8:30, so probably won't be able to get it, but it'll repeat again, I think, 8:30 Pacific time. So it'll be
They're
like
California, they're
10:30.
ahead of us.
10:30 behind. So I just put mine on tape. It's Mysteries of the Messiah. It's not so much on the Old Testament, but it's the New Testament. It's the guy that I told you about earlier that was doing kind of the history, and he's the one with the chosen that's trying to bring all the Jewish. He's a Messianic Jew. So he's bringing all this, and he brings a revelation to different things. This particular part, he's wrote a book called the Mysteries of the Messiah. But it's on tonight. It starts tonight. This is the first session. So if you want to watch it or read it, listen to it, whatever, I take mine. So I'll have them all if you want to see them. They'll be on there. So it started at 8:30 Eastern time, which is 7:30 our time. So that one's already over. But then it'll start again. 7:30, 8:30. It'll be 7:30 their time, 6:30 our time. So it starts 6:30, and then 8:30 Pacific time. So that'll be 10:30 our time. So anyway, if you're interested in that, I'll go ahead and shut this off. But just thought you might be interested in that.